Hi everybody, I'm Steve. This is the mystery talk that did not have a title on the slides. It's funny because I was super excited to be asked to come to this conference because I'd never been to Vermont before and I'd heard this place is beautiful. And so the problem is that a conference organizer, you ask people to speak like months and months before. So there's this situation where you're like, hey, please come talk to my conference. What would you like to talk about? I don't know, it's 6 months from now. If I give you something now, it's going to be boring by then. So I'd rather do it late. And then you're busy and the organizers are busy and then you realize the conference is starting and you didn't actually agree on a talk. So that's fine by me, but it's like funny because that's just the way that happens. So sorry it did not get on the website. This is the magical mystery talk. So let's do this. So first of all, I just want to say thanks to my employer, Jumpstart Lab. Basically, if you appreciate any of the things that I do in the Ruby world, that's because Jumpstart pays me to work on open source and to come to conferences. So I would not be able to be here if they were not funding my travel, et cetera. So if you appreciate what we do and you need to get better at Ruby and or Rails, you can call us up and we will teach you how to be super awesome. So that's sort of what we do is train developers. This talk is sort of nominally about this Ruby gem that I wrote called Frappuccino. So I'm going to explain what the gem does and is about, but I'm really going to talk about it later because actually gem talks are awesome, but they're also kind of boring, right? Like you can look on my GitHub and see everything that you need to know about this gem. But what I realized when I was making this gem is a bunch of things that I would like to share with you and some thoughts about like what we're doing as a community and like all sorts of other shenanigans. So this talk is sort of interesting for a couple different reasons. I'm going to start talking about what I'm going to talk about, and then I'm going to talk about it. So let's talk about what I'm going to talk about. So primarily this talk is about this concept I have called irresponsible Ruby. And I sort of laugh because it's like an offhanded comment that Aaron Patterson made about something, a gist that I'm going to show you in a little bit. And then I sort of like developed it into this whole talk. So we're going to talk about what irresponsible Ruby is and how and why you should be irresponsible when programming in Ruby. But one of the other things that I like about this and what I want to try to get across in this talk is the idea of kill your idols. So Avdi Grimm recently started this pair program with me idea where you like pair program with random people on the internet. And so every once in a while I'll tweet like, hey, this afternoon I'd like to pair with someone, like send me a tweet, we'll figure it out. And so I was working on rescue with someone that they wanted to help out with rescue. So we like worked on an issue. Here's a bug, let's write a test. Cool, our test is failing, let's write some code. And the tests still fail. Okay, let's write some other code. And the tests still fail. Let's try this way. And the tests still fail. And then they were like, hey, I'm really sorry. I'm sure this is really boring for you. And I was like, I don't know what you think I do all day, but like I'm just trying to get my test to pass as well, right? So there's this weird situation by the fact that I'm up here on stage like speaking to you all, and you all are out there listening to me, and there's this like hierarchy that's not really like true. So when you see conference talks, they're often like what has been put together after hours and hours and hours of like preparation, and you don't really ever get to see how the sausage is made. So there's this sort of weird situation where like the people that you see as like programming idols. So for example, Aaron Patterson is one of my like Ruby idols, and now that I can like consider him as a friend, I've like seen him as a person instead of this like the ideal of tender love. I realize that like Aaron doesn't know what he's doing half the time either, right? And that's part of the fun. So like we're all just in this together. We're all just as good as programmers as anyone else. Just because you're listening to me talk does not mean that I'm better than you. And internalizing that is very difficult, but it's completely true. So I really loved Zach's talk because there's so much live coding, and that's like a very honest representation of what it's like to program, right? So I have a little bit of live coding in this talk. This is the 30-minute version of this talk, so there's not a lot, but the slides are a little interesting, and this beginning is a little odd and off, so I specifically wanted to make this like kind of semi-unrefined, but I've given it 3 or 4 times by now, so it might be a little more polished than normal. But the point is that this is about how I made the gem and why I made the gem, and the code doesn't matter, and what the gem does sort of doesn't matter in some way. I kind of like want to share with you the thought process that goes into like when I make a new gem, and all these other things. So that's really important. Like you are a good programmer. Okay, so let's talk about being not good programmers. Irresponsible Ruby. So what is this concept of irresponsible Ruby? I define irresponsible Ruby as Ruby code that you would not deploy at your day job just because it's too interesting or creative. That's sort of the summary. So when thinking about breaking this down, right, when you're writing any kind of manifesto, you obviously like write the one-sentence tweet-length version, and then you come up with the like hundreds of pages book version. I'll spare that with you, for you, some sort of preposition, you, and we'll go with 4 bullet points instead. So irresponsible Ruby consists of neat hacks, weird metaprogramming, unusual techniques, and no unit tests. And I say unit tests very specifically here. So unit testing is a technique that you do to, everyone says, like, it's not about testing, man, it's about design, right? So unit tests are designed to drive the design of your code and make your code better and like fit into a certain idea of what design should be. So I think that unit tests, when you're being irresponsible, are bad. However, things like regression tests or acceptance tests are awesome. They have no constraints in your design. You're just making sure that everything is not broken, right? So this gem that I'm writing, Frappuccino, has a full suite of like acceptance tests, but no unit tests whatsoever, because I did not want tests to inform my design. I wanted to inform my own design. So unit tests is very specifically like that's the point. Zach also talked about Fiddle. And so I want to show you the kind of things that Aaron does with Fiddle since he wrote it. And this is actually sort of the original irresponsible Ruby. So this code, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger here. I don't know if you saw him tweet this a little while ago, but so you require Fiddle, and then there's this module, I'm a horrible person. And there's this def method that's sort of a helper, and it does a whole bunch of packing and unpacking stuff, and then some bit twiddling. And then there's this method, def class equals k, and then a whole bunch of more bit twiddling. And then wrap, which uses Fiddle to wrap whatever class you're passing in. And then class object include I'm a horrible person end. And what does this do? Well, basically, it allows you to do x equals object.new, x.class is object. X.class equals class.new, def lol end. X.class is that class, and x.lol prints out lol. So what this Fiddle code does is it actually, I won't get into all the super details. You can see Aaron has given a talk where he mentions about all the details. But basically what this code does is, so every Ruby class is an instance in memory, right? It's a singleton instance of that class's object. So this actually finds the place in memory where the class you're looking for is located, then digs into the Ruby C structure that classes are defined as, and then replaces the pointer to the class object from the one that Ruby set to the location in memory that it found of the class you're trying to set it to. And so Aaron just did this like for fun, and it turns out it works. If you do this in IRB and you set the class equal to string, IRB will return quote quote, and like it is actually like fully a string. So there's all sorts of ridiculous stuff that you can do, but this embodies everything that I'm talking about basically, right? Like if you deploy this, you are a horrible person. But if you're like messing around and enjoying programming, then like this is awesome, right? And this is super cool and fun and all these other things. I sort of wrote another a gem called Becoming. Actually, I turned my internet off, so I won't show you the code. But basically, the Becoming gem also adds a class equals. But my version, which is adapted from Avdi Grimm's code in Ruby Tapas, if you've ever seen Ruby Tapas, basically gives you the ability to say object.new equals O, O.becoming, and then some module, and then it adds a method missing hook onto your object by which if method missing gets called, it checks to see if that method is defined in that module, and then unbinds the method from the module, binds the method to itself, and then calls it. So this gives you the ability to do extend, but you can also unextend. And the performance is absolutely horrible, and it only works in Ruby 2.0+, but it's like fun. It's a good time. So this is the kind of stuff that I'm sort of talking about. And if you've been around the Ruby world for a long time, and I understand that many of you here have not, you of course know that the like intellectual grandfather of irresponsible Ruby is this guy. So for the benefit of the people who have been around the Ruby world in a while, who of you does not know who this is? Please raise your hand briefly. Awesome. Cool. So welcome. Welcome to Ruby. This guy is a guy named Y the Lucky Stiff. And it's funny, when I introduce Y, a lot of times, when I first gave this talk, people were like, why do you have to say who Y is? Because they forget how much Ruby has grown in the last 5 years. So Y the Lucky Stiff, who's fun to talk about in person. I was actually in a cab at one point trying to have a conversation with someone about Y, and the cab driver turned around and was like, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to listen to your conversation, but I'm really confused right now. Y is this person who wrote a lot of really creative, interesting Ruby code, and in August of 2009, he decided to quit programming and Ruby entirely and sort of left. And I have carried on most of his, the projects of his that are still alive today are the ones that I am maintaining. Some other people carried on some of his other projects and whatever. But if you do not know Y Lucky Stiff, you should go look him up and be delighted. I want to talk about a specific incident with Y. There's this blog post that was made in 2011 called A Letter from Y. You can Google this title and it will give you the blog post. And basically, this person had emailed Y and said, hey Y, I would like to be a good programmer. How do I become a good programmer? You're a good programmer. Like, what's up? And so Y wrote back this. I do not write tests for my code. I do not write very many comments. I change styles very frequently. And most of all, I shun the predominant styles of coding because that would go against the very essence of experimentation. In short, all I do is muck around. I admire programmers who take risks. They aren't afraid to write dangerous or crappy code. If you worry too much about being clean and tidy, you can't push the boundaries. Until an asteroid, Y. This is like classic Y absurdism, silliness. So if you Google this blog post, and if you read this post, you will find a comment at the top of the discussed comments. And there's a certain person whose avatar you may recognize that has this top comment on that blog post. And this individual posted, as someone who maintains Y's code these days, please write some tests. So I saw this post hit like Hacker News and Reddit and all the shenanigans, all the internets, and I was like, oh my God, people. And so this had been, after 2 years of me maintaining Y's projects, and basically one of the reasons that Y left programming was basically he had built himself a massive mountain of technical debt that he felt he was drowning under. And so I just decided to like jump right under that mountain and just be like, okay, I'm holding on to this thing. And so like after 2 years of that happening, I was like, oh my God, everyone's gonna think that writing tests is terrible because Y said writing tests was terrible, but that's why Y disappeared, and so I was in a very like bad place when I wrote this originally. But what's funny about this is I've come to realize later that basically in the end, Y was totally right, but I don't think that I was wrong either. So the important part about this idea and this situation, and I don't mean to make it all about tests, obviously, but about this idea of being creative and experimental and doing things like making modules named I'm a horrible person, is that so we build stuff, right? And one of the things I love about Ruby and Rubyists is that we're really super concerned about building stuff and how we build stuff. And we talk more about how we actually do programming than program sometimes, I think. We have more, if you're like used to the Ruby world and conferences, like there are like 5 Python conferences in the world every year, right? And like I go to more than that a month in like Ruby world sometimes. So we're really obsessed with how we go about building things. And this is great. Like I love this. It's one of my favorite parts about us. However, there's this concept called linguistic relativity, which if, like me, you've read the Wikipedia page for thoroughly, you know was called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, except for Sapir and Whorf never worked with each other, and they never produced a hypothesis, but somehow someone called it that. So the concept is actually called linguistic relativity. And basically what this boils down to is that there's a strong and a weak variant of this. The weak variant is the only one that there's been some scientific demonstration that it's a thing. But basically the idea is that the language that we use affects the way that we think. And it constrains the world and the output, the way we work on the world, and that constrains our actions. So language does actually have power. And so the problem is that we have these 2 different modes of language. So we have this responsible mode and this irresponsible mode. So the problem is that we're always concentrating on how to go about building our next startup or job or whatever. And so we're in ultra responsible mode all day. But if we're in responsible mode all the time, we completely lose all the possibilities that exist in irresponsible mode. And we lose all of those mega creative outputs, right? So I really like genetic algorithms. So I think about simulated annealing. So if you don't know about simulated annealing, don't worry about it too much. But basically the idea is that if you're searching through something and you have local maximums, then there's a global maximum, right? And so you need different algorithms to find the global maximum instead of the local maximum. So a lot of the stuff that we do worrying about how to code is leading us towards local maximum maximums rather than global maximums. And one of the ways to get around this is called like a random restart. So you restart the algorithm in another random place in the hopes that you will find a global maximum. So that's like the creative irresponsible mode process is what breaks us out of these like engineering, which is about refinement, which will only get you to a local maximum and not a global one. So Jim Weirich actually gave a talk doing TDD stuff right before I gave this one time, and he referred to the irresponsible mode as like exploratory mode. He was doing the Akata live, and he was like programming and doing TDD with this thing, and he got to a certain point, and he was like, you know, I'm not sure that tests are actually going to help me solve this problem, so I'm just going to drop in IRB and screw around for a minute. And I was like, aha, there it is, irresponsible mode. Now, once he did figure out the API he wanted to use, he did not immediately copy and paste that code back into his like actual code and like make it work that way, but he used that ability to sort of break out of the like responsible testing area and like find a new way of solving the problem that he was worrying about. This is like the mythical refactor part, right? Which is supposed to be red, green, refactor, but we actually know is like red, green, red, green, red, green, red, green, beg my boss to let me refactor. So like, in that refactor mode, you can do whatever, right? Like the point is write the test first, watch it fail, make the code pass the test, then make your code good. Do whatever you want, just don't break the tests, right? But we still, like, because we're not, like, the TDD process has the responsible and irresponsible mode built in. But since we spend so much of our time struggling with the responsible mode, we don't allow ourselves the freedom of the irresponsible mode during that refactor period. And we need both of these things, like I said, to get to like a global maximum of programming development. So this is a project of Wise that I maintain called Shoes. And due to said aforementioned giant mountains of debt, including me spending 3 years of my life trying to get it to compile on new versions of Ruby while pairing with multiple Ruby core team members and not being able to figure out how to get it to compile, we are rewriting Shoes in JRuby, and it's actually almost done. We have 4 people working on it all summer in the Google/Ruby/RailsGirls Summer of Codes. And so you can check out Shoes 4. So I'm going to show you a little bit of stuff about Shoes. Basically, here comes the live coding fun part. All right, so shoes.r, that's no good. Okay, so Shoes is basically the only GUI toolkit that does not make me want to go cry, and that's why I love it. If you've ever done GUI desktop development stuff before in something like Qt, you know how terribly painful to get desktop GUI development stuff is. So in Shoes, we do shoes.app_do and then end, and this will give us an entire application. And if you want to add a button to the page, you just type button, and you give it a title, like push me, and then you give it a block. And anything in the block happens when the button gets pushed. So you can say, for example, alert, good job. And now if we run this, the amazing JVM startup time gives me a moment to tell you that this will happen now. So we have this desktop application where the button says push me, and it gives me alert, and it says good job. This is GTK. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't screw it up. Awesome. This is GTK on Windows, and it's actually it will bind to the native stuff on, or sorry, GTK on Linux, and it will bind to the native stuff on Windows and Mac, thanks to the glory of SWT, or in the previous iterations, the actual Cocoa and Windows APIs. But basically, you can do like all sorts of other stuff too. There's lots of really great stuff in Shoes. One example that I really love is background. So you can say background and then be like from black to white, like this. And then when you run it again, it will give us this nice gradient shade from the background. Now, I tried to implement this in Qt, and even in the Qt Ruby bindings, this took me 40 lines of code if you haven't used desktop things. So you have to like create a gradient object, tell the gradient object how many colors you want to iterate through, create pen objects, create color objects, assign those colors to those pens, assign the pens to the edges of the gradient, tell it what percentage you want things to just like, So I love Shoes, and it's a great project. And it's one of the reasons why I've kept going with it, even though it has been incredibly frustrating. Yeah, when I first took over the project, it couldn't compile because it was written in Carbon, and I had just gotten a MacBook, and the MacBook had Snow Leopard on it. And if you remember, Snow Leopard, for those of you that have been Mac people for a long time, was the first version of Mac OS where they got rid of Carbon and only had Cocoa. So it was not actually finished porting it over. So I had to port a project that I couldn't even compile from one API to another in order to get it to work. Yeah, and I was like not even drinking then. So it was bad. Whoa, maybe there's a no. So Anyway, so now Shoes is way better, and we're all in Ruby, and Charles Nutter worries about our cross-platform things, and we don't have to worry about it anymore, so that's great. And now it's in JRuby. So what I was just showing you was the JRuby version of Shoes, the new one. Anyway, so Shoes is not dead. Let's talk about functional reactive programming real quick. So one of the things that can get us to global maximums is looking outside of our communities. So you probably don't know what functional reactive programming is because you're a Rubyist and we don't do functional reactive programming, but we can like steal things from other programming paradigms and possibly make stuff better. So functional reactive programming has two different parts, functional and reactive. Go figure, right? This is like the quintessential PowerPoint slide. That's great, I love it. You probably all know what functional programming is, but in order to make everyone with a gray beard mad, I'm going to say that it's using functions as a first-class concept. Basically, you know, map, filter, select, all those things that you love using in Ruby. You know, that you pass blocks to these objects and they manipulate things and whatever. We all know and are good friends with functional programming in Ruby world. However, reactive programming is data flows as a first-class concept, which is something else entirely. So FRP is using first-class functions to manipulate these flows of data. And so let's talk about what that exactly means, because that's sort of buzzwords like data flows, right? Like, what are you going on about? So this is some Ruby code. It's pretty simple. A equals 5, B equals A plus 6, B is 11, right? And then when you change A to 6, B is still 11. Duh, right? But if this is in reactive programming land, in some mythical sort of Ruby variant, when A is equal to 5 and B is equal to A plus 6, and then you change the value of A, the value of B also changes. So you're not so much like going through a C style, like assign this location in memory to this number. Like you're not doing that. You're saying there's a relationship between A and B's value is whatever A happens to be plus some other number or with some sort of combination in some other concept. So this is really neat. This is like Excel, right? And Excel is super powerful, as you all know, since it can crash our entire global economy. My old business partner, when I had a startup, he actually wanted to learn Python so that he could write an Excel macro syntax highlighter for gedit, and I told him no. I would help anyone learn programming, but as soon as you told me what you're using it for, like, nope, sorry, not going to help you do that because that's terrifying. I was like, if you want to write them in Python, that's great, but don't write more Excel macros. Anyway, so FRP was originally introduced in Haskell by this guy, Kanal Elliott, in his dissertation work. It includes these really ridiculous sounding buzzword terms that sound complicated but actually aren't, like a time varying value, which is called a behavior or a signal, events, which are things that occur many times over time, and then switching, which is the ability to react to events. So this paradigm is super useful in purely functional programming languages like Haskell, but I sort of saw this talk about it. My buddy Philip Roberts, who's a super cool dude, gave this talk at this conference, the Real-Time Conference EU 2013. It's on a boat, which is awesome. But basically, this is mostly JavaScript conference, and I went there because they asked me to speak, first of all, but secondly, because I think that going to conferences where there are other languages present gives us the ability to like steal and ransack other languages for their great ideas. So I used to go to when I lived in Pittsburgh, my hometown, I would actually go to the Python meetup group, and it like just started. So I went to the first couple ones, and so everyone was introducing themselves to everyone else, and I had to like awkwardly be like, hi, my name's Steve. I don't program in Python. I'm just here to spy on you. I'm from Ruby World, like for the first like 4 or 5 months in a row, which was fun. But the point is that I saw Philip give this talk about this library called Bacon.js. And basically, Bacon.js is a functional reactive programming library in JavaScript, and it's super cool. And so I was like, man, this is awesome. We totally need this in Ruby. So I was like, FRP, frappuccino. Okay, done. Good gem name. Like, now I have to write it. Great. Awesome. Normally you like want something, you need to come up with a name, but as soon as you have a good name, you're like forced to write the gem because like, so anyway, so basically as he was talking, I was like filling out an API, right, for like what this should be, and then during the rest of the conference, I wrote the rest of the first iteration of this gem so that we can have it in Ruby. And then I realized that I'm not sure what it's actually useful for. I just thought it was cool. So let's talk about Frappuccino itself. Wait, I need to not be in this terminal. I need to be in the other terminal. I can just do this. Okay, and then, all right, so first thing you need to do is require Frappuccino, obviously, and spell it correctly. And then we have this concept called a stream. So in Frappuccino, you generate streams of events. So I like to represent, make objects that emit events. So I'm given that shoes button example earlier with a button, I'm gonna make a button class. And this class is going to have a push method. And this push method is going to emit a push event. And then we're gonna be done. Okay, now, you may be curious where emit comes from. This code works, but I didn't include or extend or do anything. I'll just leave that as an ominous question mark. So we say stream is frappuccino stream.new, and we say what we want to make the stream's events out of. So I'm actually going to make a button. I guess I don't really need the @ whatever. I'll leave it on that one. So I'm going to make a new button, and then I'm going to pass that button into the stream. And then, so that's event streams. So what happens is every time I call button.push, this is going to emit a push event into the stream. And then we can write things that actually listen to the streams. So for example, I can say map stream equals stream.map. And just like in regular old Ruby, I'm going to use EVT because whatever. You can call map on this stream since it's like a stream of objects, right? You know what map is in Ruby, right? You take in things. So this EVT will be the event that comes in. So if EVT equals push, then I'm going to return a 1, else I'm going to return a 0, end. And in this case, we know that this is the only event. I'm just showing that you can do manipulations to these events, and you can push arbitrary Ruby objects, I think, into the stream. And so then we have this map stream, and then we can actually do all the other regular stuff that we're used to doing to the stream. So I can then say total equals mapped stream dot inject, starting off with 0, and then accumulator, and then I, and then ACC plus equals I, like this. Since I have numbers coming out, I can just sum them up. And then I can do button.push, and let's do that once more, and then puts total, I think it's now, I actually forgot to relook that up, whatever. Live coding during talks. And then, so we'll push the button twice, call total.now, then push the button 4 more times, and then call total.now. So in theory, if I typed all this code correctly, this will display a 2 and then a 6. Let's do this. Yeah, 2 and then 6. I changed the API from 2i to now recently because I was they're not always going to be integers. But so this is the basic idea: is that you have some things, they emit events, you do all the necessary mapping and streaming and injecting, and what else is cool is you can also make other sorts of streams at any point. So I can also say a negative total is equal to the accumulator minus equals 1, not minus plus equals 1. And then I could also do the negative total.now and the negative total.now. So you don't need to rebuild entire streams. You can just grab it at whatever point makes sense for you. And then this will actually put 2 and -2 and 6 and -6. So you can divert these streams and flows of things and manipulate them arbitrarily to your will, which sounds really ominous. I'm going to show you this sample of using this with shoes. So I was trying to think about how this is useful, right? Because I literally wrote this gem because I thought it was cool, and then I was I don't have a use for it whatsoever. And so I decided to put it out there anyway in the hopes that other people would have some sort of use for it. So I'm really quickly going to show you. Okay, so this is a shoes example of this happening. So I'm going to, does this even work? I'm not even sure. We'll find out. Yeah, that's not actually going to work because whatever. All right, I won't run it. But the point is that, because I'm almost out of time, basically, I make a button class, and I initialize an event, and then I push which event it is. And then I make a shoes app with a sweet yellow background. I make a plus button and a minus button that emit different events. I create a stream out of those two, so this one stream has events from both objects. And then I have a convenience map stream method that lets you pass in a hash that will convert things, because that if pattern is really common. So pluses are 1s, minuses are -1s, and then anything else is a 0, and then I sum them up. And then I make a button where you call plus.push, which you remember is our button instance, and then button -1 is minus.push, and then I make a paragraph with the current count of the button, And then every second I loop through and I update that with the current one, basically. There's also like a react. I can react to a new event being put in the stream, but I don't have that like coded here for you. But if I switch to JRuby real quick and then do a bin shoes, you can briefly see that this will give us a like +1 goes up and -1 goes down, and then it works out like this. So I think this like desktop-y applications or like building things like that is super useful, and that's what this paradigm is useful for in JavaScript is like desktop or like thick client applications. People write whole UIs in this way. Flowdoc being one of them that's like written with Bacon.js in this style. The Haskell people, because they're Haskell people, like wrote Quake in it. Which is kind of awesome. So if you imagine like the W key emits a move forward event, the player listens to the keyboard stream and says, oh, move forward, I need to update my internal X and Y and Z values. And then the graphics renderer is like listening to the player event. So it's like, oh, the player updated its position, I'd better redraw the screen with all the positions of all the new things. And like, so it's like 600 lines of Haskell gives you Quake or something. It's like ridiculous, of course. All right, real briefly, I want to show you the one other thing, because I'm going to do that since I'm the last speaker. I'm not going to infringe on anyone else's time. This will be like a 2-second diversion. Examples, samples, not examples, circle. So I also have this other brief, awesome example of this circle. So you can hit start, and it will start animating and moving up and down, and it will print out started to the console, and then stop will give you the stopped event. So it's just a little like graphical thing. And basically, the way that this works is that I cannot put spaces in between things, so that is not a command. So we make this clock that takes a reference to our application and has an on instance variable, and then we animate once a second. We emit the number if the on variable's on, and then we also emit a started string to say like, hey, that started. And then we set the on variable to true, and then stop just emits stopped and false. And then basically what happens is we make a stream out of that clock, and then we make one stream that's ticks if it's a fixed num, and then whenever we receive a value in that event stream, we update the circle by moving it to a particular position that does this oscillation. And then we also select for the strings, and then we print them out to the console whenever we get a new one. So this is sort of this example of like a unified stream of events. You grab what you want to pay attention to, you ignore what you don't, and then the buttons become really super trivial. So that's sort of the summaries. Basically, Frappuccino is the most irresponsible code that I've written lately, and so it's been sort of fun to write something. Some people have actually used it for interesting purposes, but my time is up, so I will not tell you about them. But I think that one of the tragedies in the loss of like Why the Lucky Stiff is that we have only had a couple people sort of kind of fill in that little whimsical, irresponsible element, and all of our responsibility has taken over. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge that we've sort of lost this creative side to a certain degree, and that we like try to attempt to foster some sort of weird creativeness in order to be better at what we do. But not at your day jobs, because then bad things happen. So please go forth, be irresponsible, be creative, do bad things, but not at your day job, and let's have fun with Ruby together, okay? Thanks.